All right, welcome back. We are WEBD6201 in the winter 2021 semester, client-side scripting at Durham, and it's week 6, part 1 of our broadcast. Today we're going to be talking about AJAX and what that is. So last week, where we were is we talked about a contact list and how to do CRUD, create, read, update, delete with local storage. That's what we kind of did last week. We also touched on more form validation, regular expressions. Some of you had done, some of you hadn't, as well as we created our login and register forms to help you with your lab 2. This week, we're going to be talking about AJAX, what that is, and how to create a XML HTTP request object. That's going to start today. We're also going to create a user class. That's what we're going to do today to help you with your lab 2. So things that are due, ICE 5, that's going to be due Saturday. Test 2, I've released that. That was released yesterday. Again, it's just like test number 1. You would basically, you have 2 attempts, and you have between, let's say now and Sunday at midnight to complete it. It's 15 questions worth 7.5% of your final grade. So please don't forget to do it because it's going to impact your mark. Lab 2 again is due when we get back from break, because this week is the week before break for us. Your mid-semester break is next week, between February 22nd and the 26th. So week 7 would be, it'd be at the end of the week. So it'd be like on Sunday. That's when lab 2 is due, on Sunday at the end of the week. And then I'll give you guys lab 3 when we come back from break. All right, so that's kind of our plan. I've released AJAX earlier because test 3, which is slated to come out in week 8, kind of a couple weeks before after you get back from break, is all around AJAX, and the schedule says we're going to keep doing AJAX until week 9. That doesn't make sense. So I'm going to introduce it much earlier than that, and then get you guys into Node early so that you guys can do your last lab properly. So on that, any questions around the dues, stuff that's due this week? ICE 5, again, we do it on Saturdays, test 2 and lab 2. Hopefully you guys are good with those kind of things. Let's move on. So we're talking about AJAX today, and it used to be called asynchronous JavaScript and XML, and now it's simply called AJAX. And why? Because we use Json a lot, not just XML. And really the idea is that we access the server asynchronously, and that's kind of a key learning when it comes to AJAX. Remember, whenever we access anything on the server, whether it's a file or a page or something like that, you know, it happens asynchronously, so we can't predict when it's going to happen. And there's a process involved on how to kind of make everything work properly. One thing to note, it's kind of like this round trip that we're going to be taking to the server. So we go out to the round trip with some kind of get or post request. That's the method that we can use. The server processes our request and returns information. We can get XML, JSON, or HTML back from the server in terms of a file. And then what we can do is we can update the web page without reloading it. And that is the key. Basically, this little diagram is the key to what AJAX is all about. So again, the way it works is we have an XML HTTP request object. Think about this as our payload. And then what we do is we send this Xhr object to the server, and then the server returns, basically inside of the Xhr object, the things that we request, which, for example, might be a page, some kind of data, or whatever. AJAX is used a lot, primarily in, for example, Google search was one of the first places that we noticed it. We also used it in, or it was used in Google Maps. So when Maps update and it updates the page without reloading it in real time, that is using AJAX. And there's a lot of other frameworks that use AJAX. One of them, of course, or any front-end framework that reloads the page or creates a single page application, which we're going to talk about next week, the week you get back from break. Single page application would actually work with AJAX, and that's how it works. So again, this idea of a request, a client request, and a response. And I want you to think about this round trip idea as something that we're going to carry forward into this from now until the second half of semester, because we're going to do a lot of request response, actions with the server. And we actually do it all the time, but we're going to be deliberate when we do that with Node. So I'm just going to skip down here. And this is some information for you guys. So again, there's these two pieces, a request object and a response object, that we use, like we said. And I'm just going to skip down here to, this is kind of a history of HTTP and how it's changed over the years and how we're in HTTP 2.0 as of 2015 and beyond. I'm just going to keep going. Headers are important to note. Whenever we make a request, even if it's just going to a website, we send headers across over, and it's not normally seen, but they're headers that are part of the web page, and we send it across to the server, and the server responds based on what we send it from a header perspective. Sometimes it's authentication that's included in the page. Sometimes it's other things. So we'll talk more about that in the second half. Some common types of HTTP requests are GET and POST. There's also the other ones, delete, put, and so on, and update. But the difference basically between GET and POST, because we're going to talk about those two types of methods, is it's usually used for standard web page requests. And a lot of times what we do is if I want to display a page, I use a GET method. If I want to process a page, I use a POST method, right? And the good thing about this is that the POST method is more secure in many ways than the GET method. And again, you've probably been dealing with GET and POST when you were working with PHP, if you ever did. So again, there's a bunch of stuff in our requests, and one of them is this user agent string. And the user agent string is something that is transmitted to the server from the browser, and it basically tells the server, hey, by the way, this is the browser type that is accessing your page. In earlier years, we would use the user agent string a lot, and we still do it today, to identify a mobile browser. So we can serve up a mobile version of the page as opposed to a desktop version. Because we're like, hey, look, there's a mobile browser accessing the page. It's probably in a smaller interface or a viewport. Let's send information to the mobile browser that is in a different format and with a different user story potentially. Because let's say if I'm sending it to a phone, maybe the phone doesn't need to see all my code. But maybe, as an example, if you were to go with to GitHub with your phone, you wouldn't see all the code necessarily. We'd have to request the desktop version of the page to see everything. So that is user agent. There's also other things like content encoding, content language, and a bunch of other information that you can send across to the server. That's through the HTTP, request and response. One thing that we're going to talk about today is this idea of status codes. So whenever we send a request to the server, we're going to get a status code back. A lot of times, if I go to a page and I can't find it, we're going to get this status code of 404 as a good example. With I can't fulfill the request because the page is not found. Or if you're not authorized, if it's a 401, you might get an unauthorized request back from the server. If you ever get a 500 level response, that usually means the server crashed, right? That kind of stuff. 304s are very common as well, in that if I go to a page, as an example that I've been to before, and I downloaded CSS and JavaScript, it's not going to give me the same, if it knows that it's on my browser, if I'm already cached the same version of the CSS files or the JavaScript that I'm using, it's not going to kind of send it to me again if I already have that information cached on my server. And that's where CDNs are really powerful, because CDNs make use of the caching that you have in your browser, right? To basically say, hey, you know what? You don't have to reload this stuff. It's already there. You already have it in your browser. Just use the stuff that you've already got. And of course, 200s are, any 200 request is a success. So I send a request out to the server. What I want is a 200 type request back, right? Which means, yes, everything is good, and I've sent you back everything. Your request is successful. And those are the ones I just talked about. Okay, so 200, very, very common. 304, we're going to see, and if we ever run light server, which we do, notice there are status codes next to each of the actions that we see in light server. I'll show that today, and so on. And again, we want to avoid 500s. Just going to keep scrolling down here. So we're going to talk about the Xhr object. That's going to be our payload, like we said before. It has several methods that are built in. One of them is, the send method we're going to use, and the open. Those two methods, open and send. Open is going to basically say, hey, I'm going to connect to a URL with a specific method type, get or post. And I can specify if it's going to be asynchronous or not. And if I have, if it's a secure page that I have to log into, I could send across my username and password. There's also several events and other objects that the Xhr object has. One of them is ready state. And so we talked about status. We want a status of 200, but we're looking for a ready state of 4, which means everything has been loaded. So those two things we need to kind of have in synchrony before we know that everything is okay. We can get our response text as from the data that we want. The response text is kind of the payload that comes back as JSON, and we can, as a string, but we can convert it to JSON by parsing it. That's what we can do. So that is some more information. And the way we would set it up is something like this. Hey, let's let this Xhr object is equal to a new XML HTTP request. It's kind of long, but that's how we would do it. And a lot of times what we might use is some kind of try catch, in an older browser setting to make sure that, as an example, if the Xhr object was not supported, then we could kind of document that inside of the catch. If somehow the browser didn't support Xhr or it was turned off, like AJAX was turned off somehow. Not very common these days. Most of the times, Xhr and the AJAX API is always active and is supported by like 90% of the browsers out there. So that is something to know. We don't have to do this anymore, but we used to. I'm just going to keep going here. One thing we need to do is we need to format some kind of data to read. So here's an example of a file that we're going to, we can use. We're going to make a file like this, but it's going to be more of a user's file that kind of gives us a couple of pieces of information so we can use this for logging in tomorrow. Okay, so I'm going to use kind of a file to log in with. Okay, so that is something that we can do. And this is what the file would look like if we had some kind of JSON file, which is very common. Okay, so let's get to it now. I want to start with our in-class exercise. I'm going to bring up my my files from GitHub. Let's get to that. So if I go to github.com, Durham Programmer, and if I look, you can see that I have in-class exercise 4B. I'm going to start from there. I also did 5A with the other team earlier, but I'm going to download 4B. That's our starter from this week, right? So again, 4B is what I'm going to be using as a starter. I'm going to download 4B, and when I do, I'm going to have 4B here, right? I'm going to unzip it like normal. This is just a normal way we do things. And if you had 4B from last week, you could just make a copy of it locally for yourself, right? Is it 4B or 5B? A little bit confusing, but that's okay. Let's rejig that. That is 5A and this is week 5A and 5B, but this is ICE 4B, which is exactly what we want. Okay, yeah. So yeah, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rename this thing to week 6B, week 6B, which is going to be our ICE 5B, okay, which we're going to do in a second. So let's make sure that it's named properly. I'll be okay. And then what I want to do is I want to launch VS Code just like normal, and then drag and drop our stuff into it. So there's week 6B, just dragging and dropping week 6B in there. And there you have it. So there's week 6B. I need to set up a Git repository for this. So again, what I'm going to do is control backtick, and let's say Git init. Looks like our Visual Studio Code, some parts of it have updated. That's good. Git init, git add dot, git commit -m, and then we'll say initial commit. Okay, that does the same structure that we've done before. And then I'm going to go up to Durham Programmer and make a new repository for you so you can follow along. It's going to be public, and we're going to call this, again, WEBD6201 in the winter 2021 semester, and it's ICE 5B. ICE 5B. And I'm just going to grab the last 3 lines of code here, like I've done before in the past, copy those, and go back and right-click, and then press Enter, and then away we go. It'll put everything up on GitHub. And then the last step for us is going to be going to this site. And for me, I'm just going to grab this link and put it on your DC Connect, so you can always follow along as well. Also on DC Connect, I have the test. Please, again, don't forget to do the test, as well as our YouTube recordings, which I'm doing right now, and our link. So here's our link, and this is week 6 GitHub link. How about that? Probably saying something different every time, but that's fine. All right, so that is where we're starting, and that'll be a kind of a way of reference. You can use this as reference for the stuff that I'm doing with you as we go forward. Let's continue. So this is where we're at. Let's run it. So if I do light-server, then you're going to see this page. But let's take a look and inspect that page again. Take a look. We're getting 304s. 304s mean nothing to do. You already have everything loaded. I've given you this stuff already. I've given you my index.html. I've given you node modules. One thing that it reloaded was, that's 200. 200 means A-OK. Everything's OK. Here's my app.json. I'm getting a 404 because I don't have a favicon. Favicon is like a little icon that you can put on the top left corner of your page. I haven't really loaded that or taken care of that, but that's really what it is. Yeah, this is ICE 5. All right, so that is what the status codes look like. What I want now is I want to go to my app.js, and I want to think about making this Xhr object like we talked about before. But before we get there, I want to make a couple things. Let's make a new folder where I'm going to hold my data files. So new folder. I'm going to call this folder data. And inside my data folder, you can see that it gets a nice little icon for the data. It looks like some kind of database. And I'm in the data icon and make a new file. I'm going to call this my contacts.json. Contacts.json. So .json is the file ending type, right? Again, you can use HTML with AJAX or anything else you want to load, right? Pretty much, even text will work. And contacts.json is where I'm going to store my stuff. Whenever we make a JSON file, we're going to start it off with curly braces like we've done before. And let's suppose I'm going to mimic what we already have in my local storage. I want to create an array called contacts. So contacts would be the property name or the array name in this case, colon, and then square brackets would indicate I'm going to make an array and fill it up with something. Usually it's going to be some kind of object, and the object Again, it doesn't have to be named, right? But it could be if you really wanted to. But this object is going to have similar properties to what we've done in our contact class, because that makes sense for us to do, right? So let's go into our scripts for a second and go to our contact class. And I'm going to split screen this one so you can see both side by side. So I don't care about this here. We just care about this. And you can see that I have a full name and contact number and email address and a bunch of other stuff here. But those are the ones I need. So let's put that in. So we'll say full name. Yes, you have to put in the type. And then let's just use, we'll kind of put it over several spaces like this so we can see it. Full name and then the name. We'll start putting something in like, let's say Tony Stark, since I'm a Marvel fan. And then let's go into the next one, which is contact number. So I'm just going to put in the same information that we would have normally, but you would put it here. I'm showing you what it would be like in a kind of a JSON file, right? So contact number, let's use 416-555-5556 in this case. And let's use our email address. So there's the 3 pieces of information that I normally would ask for. And we'll say ironman@example.com. And there's that 1 piece of information. So that will be considered what we like to call a document. This little document or record in our array would be one element of the array because we have an array of contacts. This would be a contact. Okay. Let's add some other ones, a few more. So I'm going to make another one, which let's use Bruce Banner for the second one. So Bruce Banner, and we'll change the number to 7, and we'll say the Hulk, right, at example.com. And let's do the next one. We'll do Spider-Man as well. So we'll put in Peter Parker, and his number will be 558, and he'll be Spider-Man at example.com. And excuse me, one more. We'll use Stephen Strange. Stephen Strange, right, which 559, and we'll have him, of course, be Dr. Strange at example.com. Okay, one more. We'll get a new entry into this one, into this little thing here, which is going to be, we'll use Reed Richards. There we go, Reed Richards. And we'll give that person 0, and this will be Mr. Fantastic. Mr. Fantastic. And they've announced recently that they're going to do a Fantastic Four movie again. Hopefully they'll do it right this time. So that is kind of our data that we can have here. And all I've done here is mimic what we would have normally seen in our local storage earlier last week, as an example. But now we're going to put it here in in a JSON format. Okay, but how do I load this data from our JSON file? I mean, we have this, our class, and right now, what I can do when I serialize from local storage. So deserialize from local storage, serialize to local storage. What about if I want to, and I can output to JSON. Here's our to JSON. I can make an object. And by the way, this is wrong. It should be full name, contact number, and email address. That's how it should be on the way out, because I want to mirror what I would normally have in our file. Full name, contact number, email address, the same way. Okay, so it's important to make that change. But if I wanted to come inbound back into the class for each of these, contacts, then I need something like from JSON. Let's do that. So maybe I'll make a from JSON method. From JSON will have some kind of JSON data, or you just use data again. And what we want when we get things from JSON is to convert back into full name, contact number, and email address from JSON file. Well, this kind of gives us hints as what we can do, but we're not going to break it up into property and whatever. but let's take this whole piece, at least this part here, to help us write it. So I'll copy these 3 lines, and I'll go back to from JSON and write those in. But instead of property, because there's no property, I want to get the data.contacts, data contacts, right? And the contact, I'm really getting a contact is what I'm getting, right? So it's really data.fullname, data.contact number, data.email address, right? That's what it's going to look like. So it'll be just like that. So data.fullname, because full name is actually going to be a property in the contact that I'm getting back. So I can just do that, data.contact number, and then data.email address. Okay, so that's kind of a thing we can get, full name, contact number, email address, as we convert from JSON back into something that's usable. And then what we can do is we can document this, right? So we can use to document this to say that the data that we're going to get back right now, it says param, and what kind of object is this? Well, we don't really know, right? It's not really quite a JSON. Sorry, it's not quite a contact object, because this is not a contact object. It looks like a contact object, but it's anonymous, right? So we can actually put in object here. So we know we're going to get an object back. We don't know what it's going to be. It's going to be kind of an any, but it's going to be an object for sure. That's what we're listening for. And then we can say this method converts JSON contact into a, and that's what we really do, into a, just like it says here, method takes and what we want to do is, and it assigns values to the contact class properties, which is kind of what this is doing, right? So it takes a data object. That's kind of what it is more than anything else. This method takes a data object and we'll say JSON data object. That's what we want. And assigns the values to the contact class properties, which is what we're really doing here. Okay, so that's what we're getting. Okay, so that is, excuse me, that is from JSON. We're just writing this just in as we're going, just to make sure that when we use it, we have a usable member in our contact class that we can use to input from this contacts list, that's what this is, into our class. Okay, so then that's great. I have this. Let's put this up on GitHub so that you have the data file, just in case you didn't follow along or you didn't type this out, and the update to the contact class. So let's do that. So again, control backtick, we bring up this. We'll add another terminal, and we'll just do git add dot git commit -m, and we'll say updated or added contacts.json and updated contact class. Hit push. Okay, so that does the update for you. You should have that up online now if you want to follow that along. All right, fantastic. So that is the first part. So first we make some kind of data object, and then here we have a contact class that can receive it. I'm just going to close this off now. And let's go into our app.js, and where we have our contact list as an example, we can kind of take a look at what we're doing here. So in our contact list, we say, okay, if local storage length is greater than 0. But, and we're getting things from local storage. But let's give an example here of if I was going to connect to our contacts.json file with AJAX. So again, we have several steps. So step 1, right, when it comes to connecting with AJAX, is we want to create an Xhr object, which is an XML HTTP request object. So that's the first thing we want to do. That's going to be our payload or container that's going to carry things forward to the server. So let's do that next. So we're going to say we'll just call it Xhr. This is just ours. Doesn't mean anything in JavaScript. Is equal to a new XML HTTP request object. We need to do this first. That's the first thing we do. Okay. This is going to be, again, this is going to be our container, if you will, our container class that's going to hold our data. And if you look there, it says it's an XML HTTP request. Okay, part 2. Step 2. We need to open a connection, right, to a file or URL. All right, so that's the next thing. So in this case, we're going to go into a file. So we're going to say, hey, Xhr, let's open up a connection. If I open it up, you can see that there's a method that we want to use and a URL string plus additional overloads. You can see that there's another overload where you can actually just also pass in a Boolean if it's async or not. We don't want to make it synchronous, that's for sure. And if it's the username and password, if any. So that's the second overload method. So we don't care about that. What we want to do is we're going to say it's going to be a GET request that we're going to use. And we're going to use the URL string, which is going to be pointing to this context.json object. So we're going to say /data. That's the file, the folder we're in, and then / and then it is context.json. So that's how we're going to load the file. We're just pointing to the file we want to load with this part. So that's part 2. And then step 3, right? We're going to send the requests to the server, right? And we're going to say xhr.send. And there's some options here, right? We can send some message to the server if we want to, some information if you want to or not. Or we can just use send by itself, which is the way I'm going to do it. So I'm just going to say, just send the information to the server. And it'd be nice if this is enough, but it's not. We need to listen for the request, for the response, right? And so whenever we listen for something, we need to have an event. So let's do that. So we're going to say step 4, listen for the response. And handle it, right? So what we want to do is we want to kind of create a listener and a handler. We can do it separately or we can do it together like we normally do. So we can say xhr.add_event_listener. And then now notice when I open it up, it says probably ready state change is what you're looking for, Tom, right? So I'm going to put that in there. So I'm going to say ready state change. That's the event that I'm listening for. So when the ready state changes, when it goes from 0 to 4, we're listening for a ready state of 4 and a status of 200. Those are the 2 things we need, right? So then if we do that, we want some kind of function to handle our response. So this is our event listener. And then right here is our event handler. This is kind of inline function, an anonymous function that can do our handling. We can also use an arrow function here, but I'm not going to do that for now. And then inside here is, and this is the key, guys, here we do everything inside this object. We don't do it outside this object. If you try and do a response somewhere out here, because of the asynchronous nature of AJAX, you will potentially get 0, nothing out here, right? But if I do something in here, I can guarantee that things are going to happen. So if we can make an if statement, and what we're going to say is if and only if the Xhr object ready state, right, is exactly equal to 4, right? That's what we want. So it's got to be equal to 4. And the status, right, is exactly equal to 200. Those are the 2 things we need. A ready state of 4 and a status of 200. That means that everything is ready. We've loaded everything. And status 200, of course, means everything is okay. We didn't have an error that's from the server or something else. We didn't have a 404 not found. Then and only then do we want to respond with let's just do a console log of my Xhr, and we want to do my response text. My response text is a property, and that's going to hold all the, it's a string that's going to hold everything we get from our context.json. So that's the steps. Okay, and we can actually put a step 5 in there if we really want to, because it's required. Step 5 would be ensure that the server is ready, right? As an example, that's ready state 4, and there are no errors. Now you can also wrap this in a try catch. What if there are errors? What do you do? Right now we're not responding to any errors, but there's nothing wrong with wrapping this part in a try catch as an example. Okay, so great, fantastic. As an example, and then here's where we got we can actually call this step 6, which is do something with the data. So this is step 6, do something with the data. Okay, we have to do something here. This is where we do it. We don't do it outside of here. If I'm going to call a function, I'm going to call it right from here, right? Because I know at this particular point in time, because of the synchronous nature of the server, that means it's going to respond in its own time and its own priority, right? That if I don't do it in here, and if I do something, if I try and deal with the data, let's say, for example, I say, okay, I want the Xhr object to be out here, right? If I say something like, let's do a console log, just as an example. I want to do the Xhr response text here, right? And let's mark it. So we'll say something like outside the event listener, right? We'll do that. And this will be inside the event listener. Inside the event listener. Right? So that's two different things. Let's see if we're going to get anything from this at all and when this triggers. So again, what I want to do to see this is let's go back to the page. Let's go to our contact. Let's go to contact list. You see that we're still getting this. And then if I go to inspect console, then we're going to see this. Look, inside the event listener, I get all kinds of stuff. Outside the event listener, actually triggered first before inside the event listener, right? And we got nothing. Asynchronous. It's going to do it in its own time. And it happened after I actually did this. So even though this was listed after the event listener, it actually triggered first. And if this triggers first before we've made sure that we've got data from the server, of course it's going to be empty because we haven't got data yet. The server hasn't responded back with any kind of data. Remember, it's happening at the same time, simultaneously, right? Concurrently, if you will, right? Because this is happening in its own thread, right? Okay. I just wanted to show you that so you know what we're facing if we don't do it in here, okay? So what we got though was this Xhr object. Look, it looks like a string. That's what it looks like. But I really want some kind of usable data and not a string. And the way I can change that is to use a parsing method. I can use Json dot, and Json has some stuff. Json has stringify if I want to convert back from JSON into a string, or JSON.parse, where if I want to convert from a string, from a JSON into a string, or from a string into JSON. So JSON.parse, and JSON.parse is basically saying, hey, take a look at this string. If you identify it as something that looks like JSON, convert it to JSON, convert it to data. So JSON.parse does that. Great. Okay, now that I've got this, that's fantastic. Let us now go back and see what we get. So we get an array, actually, which is interesting, an array of 5 items, right? And that's what it looks like. That's data. So it's been converted now into something that we can use. Guys, if we have an array, I can loop through it, right? Just like we've done before. So and notice now I'm getting everything in object format, right? Which is cool, an array of objects. And that's what this is basically saying, right? These are 5 elements in the array. Each element is an object. That's what we're getting back, an object, right? We don't know what kind of objects they are, but they're objects, right? We don't know what kind of objects they are because they don't have a type. JSON is just like anonymous objects that are inside, right? They have a shape to them. There's a shape to the objects, the properties, and potentially any methods that they come with, right? But they don't have a type. They're untyped or anonymous objects, all right, which is different in JavaScript. All right, so this is cool. So we've got this stuff here, and I want to mimic what we did down here. How do I mimic it? How do I remove, kind of loop through? Well, we want to do the looping here, in this area here. That's where I want to do the looping. So I want to kind of do the same thing that we did here, but we can't do for const key of keys because there is no key, right? Instead of that, we can do something like, we know we have, we want to use a for of, right? And here's my iterator. My iterator is going to be for every contact. So for every contact of contacts, and it's going to be from our response text. So we can say something like, again, you can break this down a little bit. If you want to say, let contacts, right, equal to json.parse, and you want to put in brackets the xhr.response text, right? And you're going to get a response text, but you want to get whatever you get from this, the context array, you want to get this and store it inside of context, then you can do that. Now, it doesn't know what's happening, but it could put for every contact of contacts, right? Then loop. And let's just print out the contact, okay? So I just want to print it out. So console log contact. And let's see what we get there. So we're kind of looping through the same way that we did down here, but in a slightly different manner. All right, so if we go back, you can see now that I'm getting each contact for each contact of contacts, right? I'm getting back. I can loop through each one of them, just like we did when we did our contact list up here, right? And this is how I would loop through. So again, notice I'm doing it inside the event listener. Okay, why? Because I have to wait for it to load. I have to make sure it's all okay, and I'm doing it right in here where I'm doing stuff with my data. Okay, cool. So this is where I'm looping through. And if I want to mimic what I have here, that's the contact list, right? So we just called it contacts. Yay. It's right here. And then I need some way of putting the data together. Let's say the contact data. We'll just call it contact data. All right. So again, notice I'm just doing the same kind of structure as I did before. So let contact data equal to, which is a string that we want to kind of put together inside of our form. And then as I loop through each contact, right, I want to do this part, right? I want to do the same stuff, and I want to do this part. So let's grab, let's also do let index is equal to 0. We'll start with index 0 or index 1, doesn't really matter, right? So we can kind of do the same thing. I'm going to put it before the for loop. So we'll just put that in there. Instead of index equals to 1, we'll call this, kind of contact index, just to make it different. So you can see that we don't have to, we're not going to have a clash with anything down here, potentially. And then we can take all of this stuff, right, and copy it and put it inside there, right? And now we have to make some changes because instead of our contact, right, we could make a new contact. Let's call this new contact. So new contact, right? Just so that, again, we don't want to clash with what we have right there, which we'll replace contact with new contact, right? We can't deserialize because we're not serializing, or we didn't serialize to local storage here. We're coming from a JSON file. So instead of deserializing, we'll use from JSON, right? From JSON, because that we have that in our new contact now. And we want our contact data, this contact data that we're getting, and it says it's coming from our key from local storage. But we don't want from local storage. We want it from our list, right? So there's our contacts list, right? And we want to say that contacts is something that we're getting, right? So our contacts is what we're getting in there, okay? And instead of our key, we don't need our key anymore. What we want is the contact index, right? The contact index, which we want to start at 0. Okay? Because what happens is it's going to loop through, and we're going to have, for every contact in contacts, well, we can actually count by 1. It doesn't really matter because we're using a for each loop, right? So if you want to start at 1, not a problem. We can start with whatever we want. So here's our contact index, and instead of index, let's replace that with contact index. So this is contact index, that'll be contact index, and so will this one, because we don't have a key anymore. right? And we'll update contact index at the end, right? So we'll start off at 1, get our data, loop through it. We'll connect our new contact. We'll make a new contact from it. And then what we'll do is we'll take our contact data from JSON, get our contact data, which now this doesn't work because contact data is going to be empty here. So we don't want to send contact data to JSON. We want to send our contact to JSON, the contact that we're looping through for every contact of contacts. So this is contact, right? So we connect our contact that we have for every loop we go through from the contacts array. We want to put it in there and create a new contact object, right, from our contact class. And we're going to use that to create our structure that we would normally put on the page. One last thing is if we were going to, kind of add our inner HTML contact list, which is what we have up here, right? Data. Data is something that we're adding into every single time, and that's, instead of data, we're going to use contact data. And let's just show what that looks like at the end. Just before the end, we'll just do a console log of the contact data. So again, we're just doing the same thing. If we were going to replace this part right here, all this, with, like, from basically this whole if statement, I was going to replace this with JSON to read from a file as opposed to local storage, right? Then I would do it like this. All right, let's try it out and see what I get. I got an error. So contact data is not defined. Let's see where that is. I made a mistake. So contact log, oh yeah. So why? Because I've got it inside of here, right? And what I probably want to do is pull it out of here, right? And pull it inside. I mean, I could do it at the bottom of my if statement too. That would solve the problem. So that means instead of doing it here, I could just do this here. That's all. So it's only if I have a ready state of 4 and response. That makes sense too. So if I go back now, you can see that I'm good. I've got all the data. This is what it would look like going back onto the page in HTML, right? So I've basically created all my HTML structures. And notice I'm starting to count by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's going to come in from a data perspective in the exact order that I have it in JSON. Whereas in local storage, it comes in any way it wants. Remember, my application is going to load in whatever way it wants, right? Whereas with my JSON data, it's going to be very structured the way it comes out, okay? So that's something to note as well. So that is an example of me taking the data from a file, and then I would use it like this as an example in my page, my contact list. The challenge is, and this is something else you have to know about AJAX, is you can't write to the file. You can read from a file, but you can't write to an AJAX file. And the reason for that is because it's not secure. And you don't want to be able to, imagine if I could write to a server, some random file, some user can write a file to the server. That could be very dangerous because they could write whatever they want. And that's why writing directly to a file on the server is not allowed. You can't do it. So AJAX, we can write it as developers. We can create a JSON file and write to it. And then I can read it if I need to read some fixed amount of data from the server. No problem. I can do that. But writing back to it, it's not possible. The only way it's possible is with a database, which is what we're going to explore later on this semester. How to do that, and we wouldn't write obviously to JSON. We'd write it into a database. That's the way we'd write it, just like we would normally write in local storage. Local storage is temporary. We can't really hurt the server with local storage or session storage, that kind of stuff. But we can read from a data file, which is what we've done, and that's really useful because I can have some information that I want to read every single time. Database makes this stuff so much easier. Absolutely. Yeah. So this is the way we can do it. We can read from a data file and then we can do something with it. Okay, awesome. So this is an example. Let's not print this to the console every single time. I'm just doing this as an example. So you have an example of AJAX and how you use AJAX. So let's put this up on GitHub. So I'll say git add dot git commit -m, and I'll say example of how to use AJAX in display contact list, because you're going to need to know that, right? And then git push. So that's the way we use AJAX, right? Which is pretty straightforward. And now what I want to do is I want to actually start making use of our login and register forms. And to do this, what I'd like to do is start by planning two things. I want to have some user data, and I want to create a user class. Okay, so we can log in and register, which we're going to use tomorrow. All right, so that's the first part. So this is how we would do AJAX. I'm going to erase this now. I put this up on GitHub, but I'm going to get rid of this because this is just an example of stuff. And because it's on GitHub, you have this information already. All right, so you can always go to GitHub and that particular for that particular commit, and you're going to see it there. So that's an example of AJAX. Okay, but I want to use a way. I want to make a way of kind of create a users .json file. Let's make that. So make a new file. This is now net new. So users.json. And let's think about how this is going to look. What is our user going to have in it? Well, we should probably mirror what we need from our register page. Our register page, and I'm just going to split screen here again. Here's our register page. Our register page that I made for you guys has certain fields that it requires, right? So for our data that we want to take information from these fields and use them. So one of them is when we create our account, it says we need a first name and a last name. First name and a last name. By the way, first name is lowercase f or capital F, and last name is lowercase l. Let's make it all lowercase. If we're going to do something, let's make it all the same. That's kind of a mistake. So make sure you fix that mistake, please. In your first name field of I'm looking at register.html. All right, so that's something that we have to look at. So we know that these two things are required, first name and last name, except I don't really care to store first name and last name necessarily. I'm going to store these two things as a display name. So one of the things I want to have is a display name that I'm going to create by using my first name and last name fields, okay? Later on this semester, we'll actually separate these first name and last name fields and make them separate. But for you guys, you'd have to do something different than what I'm doing, because if I just do what you need, then heck, I mean, I'm doing your lab for you. So let's just use something called display name. So I want an array. So users, right, is going to be have a users array inside of it. So we're going to say users. It's going to have an array of data, just like before, array of data. And inside the array of data, we're going to have, the data is going to be formatted like this. Here, let's get rid of this. The data is going to be formatted like this. I'm going to have a display name file, property. And the display name property is going to have some kind of display name, which is going to include my first name and my last name. So for example, let's just use John Smith. There's the first name and last name separated by a space. That is going to be the display name, and I'm going to get that information from first name and last name when they register. That's why I'm going to do it. Okay, you are going to do it slightly different than this. All right, next, I'm going to get the email address. So that's the next thing I want. So email address. Okay, and I want to get the email address of John Smith. So it's going to be john.smith@example.com. You can also use John Smith at example.com. And just to make it easier to read, I'm going to split this over a couple of lines. So again, just going to do one of these. I don't have to, though. I can read it from a single line in a JSON file, no problem. JSON doesn't care, right, about this kind of stuff, about the formatting and spacing. It really doesn't, right? I'm just making it like this so you can see it. So email address is the next thing, because look, it says in our register form, we need to put an email address. And then we need a password. Yeah, there's a password. So first name, last name, right? As an example, first name, last name, email address, and password. Okay. And okay, that's interesting. What about a username? Is there some kind of username or anything like that? Well, we got first name and last name, but it really doesn't have, we don't really have a username here. Okay. Well, what we want to do is we want to make a username out of probably the first name that we get. We're going to convert this into a username or some kind of username that is formatted from our display name, but in a simple way. We can also use the email address as a username, but I'm just going to make another field. So we're going to say one of them is going to be username, and the username is going to be something like John Smith, no spaces. And then finally our password, right? So password is also going to be something that's there, and we're just going to use the password of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right, for our users. Okay, that's the way we're doing it. So that is respecting the register page to some degree. Okay, again, if I really wanted to split this out, then I would have a couple of additional fields. First name and last name would be things that I would have here. And one thing, of course, I'm missing is a username. Okay, now I would probably add a username field, and we're going to do that in the second half of the semester. But for now, it's just, I gave you a form that you need to use for your lab, and that's why I put it here. Awesome. So that's our first user. Let's make another one to test with. So instead of John Smith, we'll make it Mary Smith. Actually, May Smith. Here we go. May, like Aunt May. May Smith. And we'll be very simple. We'll have the same structure and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And finally, we'll make an admin user. So the admin user is going to be similar to this. Except the display name is going to be admin, capital A. And my email address is going to be admin@example.com. And the username is going to be admin. And the password is going to be the same. Okay, just so that way we can see the way it's been written. So those are some users we've made, and we've kind of followed the register page. That's how we would register users. We could register in the same way, right? And what we want to have is when we log in, and let's take a look at the login page now for a second. So again, I'm just going to go over here and type in login. So our login page basically says, I want a username, right? Please enter your username and your password, right? And it's going to confirm what this is. And if you don't have that, you can register. So you definitely need username and password because we know we're asking for it in our login page. A username and a password. Username is spelled weird. Our name should be probably username. Let's change this. And also the ID is wrong. Take a look at that. The ID is actually contact name. We should make it username. I don't know how that slipped by me. Again, minor things, copy paste errors most likely, but this is how it would look. Username and password and that kind of stuff, okay? And the submit button, which is a type submit, is login. It's going to show a button primary login, and we're going to change this later on, but that's kind of how it works. So a couple minor errors to be fixed. Okay, excellent. So that is our login page, and we've figured this out. Nice, nice, nice. What I need now is some kind of class to accommodate my user. I don't have a user class. Let's make one. So again, I'm going to do something that's very similar to our contact. So I'm going to just copy paste my contact. So Control C, Control V. And then what that'll do is we'll create a contact copy. I'm going to rename it. It's going to save us some time. I'm going to call this user.js. User.js is not going to be a contact, so we can change the name of the class. It's going to be the user class. It's going to be class user. Instead of full name, we're not going to have full name. We're not ever going to have full name. We're going to have the stuff that we had before. So let's do a split screen. And on the right-hand side, we'll have the information we had from our users.json, right? So here's our user.js, but here, users.json. Okay, you can do this so that way we can see, to match up what we get here. So display name is something that we want. So copy this. So that's going to be the display name. And we might as well have a private member field that is called display name, right? That's in here. So we're going to hold on to the display name here. Okay. Contact number we don't need. We do need email address. So we have email address in here already, because that is something similar to our contact, right? Email address, display name. And now username and password, those two things. So let's put those in place. So username. And that'll be username. And password. Again, not always wise to put clear text password, but for now it's okay. Awesome. So we've matched all the fields with all of our getters and setters. This is important, right? So we want to match all this up, right? So it doesn't look different than what we have here in our data. Our data is going to be matched up with our class. Let's also fix up the constructor and get rid of this comment. So again, we want, instead of full name, we want display name and not data, display name. And we also want to change this to display name when we create it. Display name is something we want to make. And what about contact number? Contact number, there is none, so we can get rid of this. Save us some effort. And we care about email address, though. We do. And we do care about username and password. So username is equal to blank. We're making blanks because we can add a kind of an empty user first, and then we can fill them up just like last time. And password, which we're going to make like this. So again, this is our user on the left. This is our data on the right, right? And then we're going to kind of do this dot username is equal to username, and this dot password, capital P, is equal to password, lowercase p, which is this is our parameter, this is our property. Okay. Nice, nice, nice. And if I'm going to go in there, then I want to convert it to string. I don't need this anymore. I've got everything I need from here. So I'm just going to kill the full the split screen and just create our toString method, right? Which is what we want to do, right? So let's do that next. So again, instead of full name, it's going to be display name. I want to inspect the user. I want to do this. Our contact number won't be there, so we'll get rid of the contact number, right? So we're just going to just space in there and grab that. So there's email address. We want that one. Display name, email address, and username. But we're not going to output the password because that would be a security problem in real life. We don't want to do that. So we'll just call this the username. Username, and this will be this dot username. And besides, if we one day we're going to hash for the password, we're going to encrypt this thing a little bit, and so it won't look like clear text anymore. All right, so that is how we can print this out. What we do need, we can put in a comment for the constructor, so we can use document this to document our constructor. The square brackets mean optional. optional display name, email address, username, and password, the square brackets. And this is the type, string. All right, so that is our user.js class. To JSON, does it make sense to put it back out to JSON? No. So we don't need this. From JSON, we don't need serialize and deserialize. Well, we might need something serialize and deserialize because we might want to put this up on in session storage, right? So, but we don't need to JSON and from JSON because we already are JSON. We're getting it from JSON anyway, right? Well, and sorry, let me just take that back. Undo. Sorry, we might need from JSON because I may want to take a JSON object, and this will be the user class, not the contact class. So this is an important distinction. Make sure you replace anything that says contact with user because you want to document this properly, right? So user class, we want to JSON. So now again, full name. If I want to convert to JSON again, I want to show the JSON. I don't want to put out the password, but I definitely want to put out information about my full name, contact number, and email address. So it won't be full name, it'll be display name, which will be this dot display name. Again, I'm just going to copy, and this should be display name as well. How about that? And then this will be email address, right? So that's correct. And then finally, username. Okay, so that's going to return that out, right? So to JSON is going to return this. And from JSON is going to take a data object and convert it back in. So if I wanted to get something from JSON, then we can do that. So again, it'll be the other way around. So I'll say display name here. That'll go into display name. And then email address will go into it. Now from JSON, we want to get our password because we're probably going to get it from a file, right? So we probably need from JSON there as well. So email address, and then username, right? So we're going to say that, okay, cool. So this dot username is equal to data.username, and with a capital U, as well as this dot password is equal to data.pass. This is again coming from file, right? Because we have that password 1234556 as an example that we're getting in, coming inbound into the object. When we serialize, I want to output, and this is the method converts the user into a comma-separated value string that we want to put on our session storage, right? So we're going to use instead of local storage now, we're going to use session storage instead, right? Because sessions are going to say that we're logged in or not, right? So we're going to serialize this, and we're going to do the same kind of job that we did last time with serialization. So I'm going to say if the display name is equal to this, not equal to this, and we want at least 3 pieces of information, display name, and I want the email address, and I also want let's do one of these, and I also want all those 3 things have to be live and ready to go. I also need a username. So if username, because we can possibly get stuff that's missing. Let's get rid of that comma. So, and username is not equal. So all those things are true. Then I want to return the display name out to the session storage. I want to output the email address, right? Actually, do I want to input the email address? The display name is really all I need, right? But I want to store everything, information about my user, the logged in user, right? So maybe not the email address, but because I'm serializing, I'm putting it out to the session storage, right? but definitely display name and username. I need that kind of thing, right? Display name and username. Email address, not so much, but if you really want to, and if you want to have a profile or something like that that's stored in session storage, then we can have it there. And then something like put the next piece in there, which is going to be username. So again, the reason why we're using username and not password is we're not going to store a password in our session storage ever. We don't want to store passwords. Otherwise, one or more properties of the user is empty, right? We can't serialize because there's a problem, okay? So that is our user into a comma separated value string, right? And then on the way back in, if we want to get from session storage, which is unusual, but let's suppose we do, or something like that, then I want to do the same data.split. But if I'm going to get something from session storage, so I'm kind of have a list of users as an example, I probably won't need passwords because that's the only time I'd want a list of users to fool around with, right? From session storage or from local storage, let's say. So I'm not going to split up, and we'll just kind of move this into this. So it's going to be full name, it's going to be display name, and then email address will be the second one, and then the third one, just like we have here, is username. So this is not something that's going to get data complete, not data complete from everything, kind of thing. It's only going to be something that we're going to take inbound, right? Only if and only if, we have something. And of course, the core down here, which is core contact is equal to contact, it should say core user is equal to user. And now we've created our user class, okay? Which is very similar to our contact class, but different, right? All right, questions around our user class and how we're going to use it. Let's put this up on GitHub for you guys. So git add dot git commit -m added user class. And then git push. So yeah, we've created this because what we're going to do is we're going to kind of make a system of logging in and registering, right? Now, registering is not going to really do much. Registering is only going to create a temporary user. That's all it's going to do, because we can't really register, because registration means we would have to save the registration somewhere, okay? That's wrong. You guys didn't even say this. Anything here, but I caught it. Display name, email address, username, and this will be display name with a lowercase d. And so we can have everything we need here. And let me just push that up again as a change. Git add dot git commit -m fixed user class bug instructor bug. Before I even meet it, git push. Sorry, just want to make sure that that's there. All right, so that is everything that we need for our user class. And we have our users .json file that we're going to read when it comes to this kind of stuff. All right. So next, what I want to do is give a mechanism and create a mechanism for log in, log out, log in, log out. So this is where we're going to go into the next phase. How do I detect when a user is logged in and logged out? And how do I modify my navigation so that's true, right? So if I look at my navigation data, right now, if I look at any of the pages that I have, let's say my index.html page, my index.html page has about, projects, services, and contact. There's nothing in here whatsoever to say that I'm logged in or not, right? And what we need to do is we need to assume that I need to log in, right? And what I want to do is when I'm logged in, I want to swap out my login link with my logout link. I want to have a logout link. all right, that does different things than my login. So let's add in the login link for now that takes us to the login page, okay? So I'm going to copy this last link, and we're going to copy it in all these pages so you see how brutal this is. And we're going to fix this later on by using AJAX. All right, so instead of using a contact, I've just made an extra contact link here. I'm going to use a login link, right? So login.html. Again, what we want is some kind of login link. So if I was going to go to login, there is something called sign in Font Awesome. Let's take a look at that. So if I go to Font Awesome and I look for a login, then it looks like we have something called sign in, right? And if I type in sign in, the only one that's free is sign in alt. The other ones are pro. You have to pay for all those. So we're going to use this one, sign in alt. FA sign in alt is what we want. And I'm going to replace the class that's in here with that. And then we're going to say log in. So let's just trial it and see what it looks like on our index page, because this is where we're going to first do it. We're going to first see the login on our index page. Okay. So again, going back to our pages, we're not going to see it here yet because we didn't put it inside this page. All right. So let's go inside the login page or the home page. So here we see login, and this should take us to the login page like this, right? This is the login page you should see right now. Okay. I think it needs some spacing. I think it needs some adjustment, but whatever. But this is the page we can get to. We can get to the login page from the, the web, our home page. Okay. So I want to take the same link and then put it everywhere, right? Because we need to do that. One thing I want to be really careful about before we start copying is I need a way to hook into this later on using code, so that way I can swap out the login with something else. Okay, I want to swap out this list item. And so what we're going to do is we're going to give it an ID. Let's be smart about it. Let's give it an ID of login. Okay. So that is, again, you can also give it an ID of security or login, log out, whatever you want. But for me, I'm just going to put login. All right. So that is the login ID. So I'm going to say, hey, any nav item that has or any list item with an ID of login, that's going to be this. I want to replace the inner HTML, that means all this, with what I need. So I'm going to replace it with log out, right? So it's going to be either log in or log out, depending on if I'm logged in or not. Okay. So I need that. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to go back to my about page and put that in. So put that in there and save it and go back into my contact list, and wow, this is terrible. And put that in there. And then this is going to tell us, look, you know what, maybe, it would be nice if that, it'd be really nice if there was some kind of system that we can use, right? That we would have our navigation kind of loaded in a, kind of, as opposed to me putting it in every single time. That doesn't make any sense. By the way, if I'm in a login page, then I might as well make this page active. So nav link, where it says nav link, just like we've done in the past for about, notice it says for about, the about page is nav link active. I want to do the same thing with my login page, nav link when I'm here, active, right? Cool. And then I want to do the next one. So last one is projects. There's a couple more. So projects, and as well as register. I don't have a register link, but that's register and services. There we go. Okay, so that's all the pages updated. Let's make sure that that page is updated as well. So I've pressed saved in all of them. That's important. And my index page got to be saved too. That's important too. So all those pages you can see have been updated. Yay, awesome. And let's push this up to GitHub. So I'll go control backtick and I'll say git add dot git commit -m, and I'll say added login link to each page. Git push. What a waste, right? I'm saying what a waste because truly it's a waste, right? It's like really not great. But what we, as an effect of all this now, anytime I go to any of the pages, so if I go to About Us, we have a login, projects, services, contact us, and even our login page. Now this brightens up because it shows login. And if I click register, it's going to take us to our register page. So it's kind of hooked up now, right? Which all with all this stuff. So you should have the same thing. Nice, nice. Again, this is all prep for what we're doing in the second half of the semester. Cool. All right, excellente. This looks nice, nice, nice. And what I want, notice it says first name, last name for my registration, email, password, and confirm password. And we'd have a form. When we actually register, we want to go through the form and confirm. This is all stuff we're going to try and do over the next day or so. All right, but what about logging in? So I want to connect our user class, again, to every page, right? Because every page needs the ability for us to have access to the user class. So we can do a couple things. We can use the user class. So that means that every page now that we have this stuff, man, I got to go through here and add every page has to have my username, my user, not contacts. Contacts not required, but user is required everywhere. So that is in my namespace, after my namespace, before my app.js, I need to have a script. Remember, we can't use the class we created unless we connect it to our pages. If it's not connected to our pages, the class doesn't exist for that particular page. So script source, and then /scripts/ users, or yeah, sorry, our user.js. Our user.js. User is the user class, right? Users is the users.json data file. That's why I put it in data. Cool. There's our users class, our user class. And I want to do that in every file. Again, about page. And this is terrible. Terrible, right? Make sure I save in the user index.html. And let's go on my contact page, right? Now, which one should be first, contact or user? Doesn't matter. I'll just put user in there. And contact.html, as well as my edit.html. It's got to be everywhere, right? Because these are, you know, information that we have to kind of carry forward and every page, and I need to put it in. So you can see that there's a lot of duplication here, guys. A lot of duplication. And this has got to become easier. This can't be like this, right? Because it doesn't make any sense, right? And here's our register.html and services.html. I know I'm hammering this to you in this way, but this is something that we need to think about, right? How do we, make this easier? Because this is what web developers faced in the beginning. Before AJAX, we had to do it this way, right? And why? Because each page was not a dynamic page. Each page was a static page, like these ones. These are static pages because they're not, well, except for maybe our contact list. This could be considered dynamic because I'm using local storage now. But for the most part, it's really just a bunch of static pages here that we have, right? All right, so that's cool. We've loaded everything. Let's make sure that it works. So if I go to my console, we should see no errors in the console. This is important. If we see errors in the console, it's bad. I should also go from any page, whether it's register or login or whatever, and I should be able to do something like core dot, and we should see user, as well as, if I want to go to contact, so there's core user, right? If I want to make a new user, I can say something like let user is equal to a core user, and I can pass in my display name, which is like, Superman, and my email address, which is clark.kent@example.com. as well as my username, which is Superman lowercase. And I should be able to do this and add it in. And I need to do, the one thing I did wrong was I didn't put the new keyword. So I need to use new to allocate memory. That does it. And then if I do user dot toString, right? So if I said toString, then I could get the display name, which is what I'm looking at here. Superman, Clark Kent. And you see that there's issues automatically, things I need to correct because display name and first name, as an example, are slightly differently spaced, but who cares? For the most part, I'm getting everything I want in this. This is kind of what our user looks like, and I can do that here. So core.contact doesn't exist in the register page because it only exists, if I just said core.contact, it doesn't exist in the register page. But if I go to the contact page, and if I do core.contact, then we're good to go, right? Or are we? Well, one thing we're missing is the new keyword, but if we put core dot, we can have contact, start, and user because those are three things that are available here. So that is only available in that page. So we don't need contact everywhere. But again, we may elect to put contact everywhere too because it's part of our core classes as an example, and it's not going to hurt us to do it. It's a little bit more code in every page, but it allows us to add or access contacts and stuff, especially some other places. So this is something we can decide to do later. Again, I've updated. Notice the modifications. These are all the modifications I've done to my site. I'm going to press Control Save, Control Backtick, and then add that to GitHub. Git add dot, git commit -m, and I'll say updated each page with reference to user class. Hit push. And that'll do at least that part. At least I've pushed everything and you have all the latest updates to this thing. I have connected my user to everything now, and those are good. But one thing I need to do is now I got to think about what I do when I log in. What do I do? How do I log in? Right? Well, I want to read the data file that is my users.js, and I want to compare it to my username and password that I have. So whatever I enter in username and password in my login file, so this is my login page, right? So when I log in and I put in my username and password, when I put these two things in, then I want to be able to compare the data. So read them in, whatever I entered, right? Username and password. And I want to compare it to the username and password that I have from my users.json file. So I set up a users in my app.js, right? If you scroll down, I have created already a display login and display register, kind of function. And inside here, this is where we're going to actually do the code and display login. But we're sitting at 9:38 today, and I think I want to stop at this point, and we'll come back tomorrow. And when we come back tomorrow, we'll do the rest, which is going to be hooking up our login and our register page, saving it on session storage, which is what we want to do, right? Not local storage. And when we save it on session storage, it's temporary. So if we log out or if we close the page, as an example, close down, leave the page altogether, then what's going to happen is it's going to log us out. It's going to eliminate our user information. And it's different than local storage because it's only temporary, right? So when we log in, it's going to keep track of our session, as an example, and it's going to kind of persist for a while, and then afterwards, when we're done, by the way, we can make it expire and all those things. And one thing to note, before we go, let's look at session storage instead. So if I say session storage, right, and JavaScript, if I look at that, and if I go to developer.mozilla.org, which is kind of our web API information for all this stuff, it says Read-only session storage property accesses a session storage object for the current origin. Session storage is similar to local storage. The difference is that while the data in local storage doesn't expire, data in session storage is cleared when the page session ends. That's pretty cool. Whenever a document is loaded in a particular tab in the browser, a unique page session gets created and assigned to that particular tab, and that page session is valid only for that particular tab, right? So that means that if I close that tab down, I lose my session storage, right? Which is good. This is important. And data stored in session storage is specific to the protocol of the page, so HTTP rather than HTTPS. And the keys and the values are always in the UTF-16 DOM string format. And we do this window.session-storage to get a reference to it. And of course, we have some basic usage: set item, remove item. All right, those are two things, and get item. We can also clear session storage to get rid of everything. When we log out, we'd want to clear session storage, right? We don't want to have anything in there. And so on. All right, so those are the things that we have in there. And you can see the browser compatibility is pretty much every browser has the ability for session storage. It's pretty up there, right, in terms of what it looks like. So very similar to local storage, but if we close our browser tab, like if we do one of these, I'll go up to my browser tab here and just close, then session storage is gone. That's the difference between local storage and session storage. And we're going to explore that next day. All right, so before we go, any questions? And I'm just going to go back to this. So we've covered, just to review, we've covered the idea here in the PowerPoints. It also covers this the structure. So again, we do kind of like, we make a new Xhr object. We talked about that. We have to specify the method and the URL. We have to also, if you scroll down or go down to further down inside of our PowerPoint, you can see that we have the send. We can send nothing if you want to, or we can send some data. It's up to you, or we can just send nothing, like, and something that's empty, which is what we did. And we can also send information. When we send information to the server, it can do something. If I want to search for a specific term or something in a particular item and return only one part of it, I can do that too. And you can see that I can pass that information to PHP if I had a PHP backend, as an example, which we're not going to do this semester. But this is how it would work if you were using PHP, right? So kind of cool. And response XML returns XML. Response text returns a string, and we can convert it to JSON. Again, we go here through the ready state numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We want ready state 4, which we talked about before, which is complete, as well as we want a status code of 200. That's what we're looking for, and that is the things that we need. And here on page 51 is an example of all the pieces that we need to get going. Here they just use a get HTTP object, which is just a function that they use to wrap around the Xhr object, just in case the browser doesn't support it. But we don't need this. We actually created a brand new object, and we use let instead of var. So that is kind of the only difference that we have. And we're around page 51 here in our code. All right, so just before we go, I just want to remind you of a couple of things. So please don't forget to do your test. Some people forgot to do their test last time around, and they emailed me and said, oh, I totally forgot to do my test. I didn't realize it was there. It wasn't in your original outline, blah, blah, blah. And that messed me up. Can I get it? Can I do it again? And I allowed it. But now you guys know about tests. So please try and get it done so that you don't forget to do it. It's worth, again, 7.5% of your final grade. So if you haven't had a chance to, it won't take you long. And the questions are fairly straightforward. They're right out of the things that we've talked about here. And for jQuery, that's what it covers. And again, this test is due Sunday at midnight. You get 2 attempts, and we take the best of the 2 attempts. Any questions before we go for the day? I know I've repeated myself a couple of times, but sometimes it's necessary just to make sure you guys get it. All right, guys. Well, then, thank you so much. I'll see you guys tomorrow, and we'll talk more about logging in and logging out using our user class, and we'll find out interesting ways of swapping out our login with log out when we're logged in. All right. Thanks so much. I'll see you next day, tomorrow. Take care.